based on your knowledge and experience, what key variables should one factor in to reflect COVID impact on financial models? Yeah. So the precedent that I started using when I was making my models was SARS originally. And of course, it's much more extreme than SARS. And I remember back, I had just left Goldman to join the first hedge fund I worked at in New York. And I remember I think it was Q2 of 2003, when I was reading the quarterly financial statements, the 10Qs from sec.gov, a risk that everybody had started listing was SARS. And what I did at that time was, in Microsoft Word, what you can do is you can take two different documents and do auto compare, and there'll be blue words for what's new and red crossed out for what's taken out. And so I would do an auto compare of the previous year's 10Q and the current 10Q for the second quarter 2003 and see what the changes are. And I know, and obviously the numbers are all different. You don't look at the numbers, you just look at the qualitative stuff like risks. And so I saw the language had changed a lot in that new risks were added. Like we are somewhat worried about SARS. And the next quarter, we are very worried about SARS. And so when it came to COVID initially, I was looking at the impact that SARS had. And it was devastating. I remember to Toronto at the time. I worked at Goldman Sachs. Actually, I was at Goldman first, and then I went to Kingdon Capital in New York on May 6th, which is a Monday, 2003. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Andrew was born a year later. My 16-year-old here in the blue shirt. Yeah. But I remember the director of research at Goldman called me when I worked at Goldman, and he said, I don't want any analysts from New York or any to be sent to Canada, to Toronto specifically because of SARS. And so the impact was devastating. Not nearly as bad as it is right now, because we kind of figured out how to solve the SARS issue, sort of. So I would kind of look at SARS initially, but then think 10 times worse, obviously. And there's really no precedent for this, like economically speaking. Like your parents, like my parents, they've never seen anything like this in their lives. And so there's no precedent from an economics perspective for modeling GDP or revenue growth or contraction. So you can go back to the Spanish flu, but that was before we had financial models, kind of. So I would kind of, and I look at an index called the VIX, VIX, which is, it's a derivative instrument that measures volatility offered by the CBOE, Chicago Board of Exchange. And the VIX is the fear index. And the VIX, it was higher earlier this year than it was at any point in '01 after 9/11, and at any point in '08 when we were within 24 hours of bank machines not working. So there really is no historical precedent on how to model this. You know, I would basically look at whatever GDP contraction is year over year. I would assume that it's 2x bigger contraction-wise for most companies, at least. Because governments have, stimulus programs, fiscal policy and monetary policy to jumpstart the economy. Monetary policy is cutting interest rates, and fiscal policy is stimulus programs and everything else. Individual companies don't have their own monetary policy, et cetera. So I would think that the year-over-year decline in revenue for a lot of companies is much more extreme than it is for GDP. So maybe I would start with looking at 2x worse. And of course, lots of industries are going to be hit much harder than others, like the airline industry. Much, much worse. You have to use common sense, obviously, as well. And other companies are going to benefit tremendously, like Netflix.